The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glow across the sterile conference room. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the mahogany table, knuckles white from the effort to maintain some semblance of composure. Around me, the executive team sat in their leather chairs, faces a mix of smug satisfaction and feigned concern. At the head of the table, Marcus Caldwell, the CEO who had personally recruited me just 18 months ago, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but his intentions crystal clear. "Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be," he said finally, his voice smooth and calculated, like every word was rehearsed for maximum impact. "We all know you're struggling to keep up with the demands of this position. Frankly, we've been patient." Patient? The word hit me like a slap. 18 months of pouring my soul into this company, working weekends, sacrificing holidays, and enduring countless sleepless nights, all dismissed in one condescending remark. The irony wasn't lost on me that just last quarter, I delivered record-breaking results for the marketing division, surpassing even our most ambitious projections. But apparently, none of that mattered now. I forced myself to meet his gaze, though my stomach churned with anger and humiliation. "Marcus, if there are concerns about my performance, why weren't they addressed sooner? Why wait until today?" He smirked, leaning forward slightly. "Oh, come on, Nadia. You can't tell me you didn't see this coming. Your presentations have lacked polish lately. And frankly, your leadership style has become divisive." Divisive. That was rich coming from him, a man whose idea of leadership involved pitting employees against each other in cutthroat competition while he reaped the rewards. Still, I refused to let him rattle me completely. Years of navigating corporate politics had taught me how to mask my emotions behind a carefully constructed facade. Or at least, it usually did. Today felt different. Today felt personal. As the meeting dragged on, each comment from the executives around the table felt like another nail in my coffin. They dissected everything, my decision-making, my communication skills, even my choice of wardrobe during client meetings. It was absurd, maddening, and worst of all, impossible to defend against because no matter what I said, they'd already made up their minds. This wasn't about feedback or improvement, it was about power. Plain and simple. By the time Marcus wrapped up the session with a patronizing suggestion that I consider other opportunities within the industry, I could barely breathe. My chest tightened, and my vision blurred as I stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked toward the door, but I didn't care anymore. Let them stare. Let them whisper. None of it mattered now. The hallway outside was mercifully empty, the hum of office chatter fading into the distance as I quickened my pace. My heels clicked against the polished tile, echoing louder than they should have, each step propelling me further away from the toxic environment I'd once called home. Part of me wanted to scream, to turn around and march right back into that conference room and demand answers, or better yet, demand justice. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. Not here. Not in this place where loyalty was a currency traded only by those willing to compromise their integrity. As I reached the elevator bank, tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away furiously. Crying wouldn't solve anything either. What I needed now was clarity. Perspective. A way out. But before I could press the button to summon the elevator, a voice rang out behind me, sharp and urgent. "Nadia, wait." My heart sank as I recognized the voice. Of course it was Marcus. Who else would chase after me? For a brief moment, I considered ignoring him, pretending I hadn't heard. But something stopped me, curiosity maybe, or perhaps a flicker of hope that he might actually apologize. Turning slowly, I faced him, arms crossed tightly over my chest. "What?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "What could you possibly want to say now?" Marcus approached cautiously, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something resembling genuine concern. He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one else was nearby before speaking. "Look, I know how that meeting must have felt." "You don't know anything," I interrupted, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to steady it. "You sat there and let them tear me apart like I was nothing. Like everything I've done for this company means nothing." His jaw tightened, and for a split second, I thought he might argue. Instead, he sighed heavily, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I admit, things got out of hand in there. That's not how I wanted it to go. But Nadia, you have to understand, it's not personal. It's business. Not personal. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and broken. Really? Because it sure as hell felt personal when you questioned whether I belonged in this role. When you implied I wasn't good enough. Nadia, stop. His tone softened, almost pleading now. Please. Just hear me out. I hesitated, torn between walking away and giving him the chance to explain himself. In the end, curiosity won out. Folding my arms tighter, I nodded curtly. Fine. Talk. For a moment, he looked relieved, as if he hadn't expected me to listen. Then, taking a deep breath, he began. There's pressure coming from the board. They're pushing for changes, restructuring teams, cutting costs, things I don't necessarily agree with, but I have to answer to them. Your department, well, it's been targeted as a potential area for consolidation. My stomach twisted painfully. Consolidation. A fancy word for layoffs. So that's what this was about. I wasn't being fired because I wasn't capable, I was being sacrificed to appease shareholders. And you couldn't have told me any of this before humiliating me in front of everyone? I demanded, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. You couldn't have given me a heads up instead of blindsiding me like this? I tried, he insisted, his frustration evident. But the board insisted on moving quickly. Believe me, Nadia, if I'd had more time, I would have handled this differently. I value what you've brought to the company. More than you realize. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of sincerity. Was he lying? Trying to manipulate me into staying quiet about whatever scheme they were planning? Or was he genuinely regretful, caught between his responsibilities as a CEO and his humanity? Before I could decide, the elevator dinged softly behind me, signaling its arrival. Without another word, I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. Marcus reached out instinctively, as if to stop me, but thought better of it at the last second. As the doors slid shut, I caught one final glimpse of his face, guilt-stricken, conflicted, and undeniably desperate. The ride down felt interminable, each floor passing slower than the last. By the time I reached the ground level, my mind was racing with questions I didn't have answers to. Had Marcus been telling the truth? Was this really about the board's demands, or was he just trying to save face? And more importantly, what was I going to do next? Stepping out into the bright sunlight of the city streets, I paused for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt untethered, free from the constraints of a job that had consumed so much of my life. Yet, beneath the surface, a spark of determination began to ignite. If Marcus thought he could push me out without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The city buzzed around me, oblivious to the storm raging inside. People hurried past, clutching coffee cups and briefcases, their faces fixed on destinations I couldn't see. For a moment, I envied them, their routines, their certainty. They didn't know what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under them, to be dismissed so casually after giving everything they had. But then again, maybe they did. Maybe everyone walking these streets carried scars of their own, hidden beneath tailored suits and practiced smiles. I walked aimlessly at first, my legs carrying me farther away from the glass and steel tower where I'd once believed I belonged. The farther I got, the lighter I felt, as if each step was shedding another layer of the weight that had pressed down on me for months, no years. It wasn't just today's humiliation, it was the constant grind, the endless push to prove myself in a world that never seemed satisfied no matter how hard I worked. But anger burned through the haze of self-pity, sharp and unrelenting. Anger at Marcus, at the board, at the entire system that chewed people up and spat them out without a second thought. And anger at myself, for letting them make me doubt my worth, for staying silent when I should have spoken up, for believing that playing by their rules would somehow guarantee my place at the table. By the time I reached the park a few blocks away, my thoughts had crystallized into something tangible. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. A chance to reclaim control over my life, to rewrite the narrative they'd tried to impose on me. I sat down on a bench overlooking the fountain, pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened the Notes app and typed 3 words, corporate revenge plan. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Dramatic. Over the top. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. About exposing the truth behind the polished facades and holding those in power accountable for their actions. If Marcus thought he could sweep this under the rug, he was wrong. Dead wrong. The next morning, I woke up with purpose. Gone was the fog of despair that had clouded my mind the day before. In its place was clarity, and a plan. First things first, I needed information. Not gossip or speculation, but cold, hard facts. Numbers. Emails. Decisions made behind closed doors. If the board wanted to consolidate departments, there had to be a paper trail, a record of who stood to gain and who stood to lose. And if anyone knew where to find it, it was Rachel. Rachel Kim was my former assistant, promoted to executive coordinator 6 months ago after proving herself indispensable during a particularly grueling product launch. She was smart, resourceful, and fiercely loyal, to me, not the company. More importantly, she still had access to files most employees only dreamed of seeing. I sent her a quick text, "Can we meet for lunch? Off-site. Important." Her response came almost immediately, "Of course. Everything okay?" "Not really," I replied. "But I'll explain when I see you." We agreed to meet at a small cafe 2 blocks from the office, a safe distance, far enough to avoid prying eyes but close enough for her to slip away during her lunch break. When she arrived, her usual cheerful demeanor faltered as she took in my expression. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "You look intense." "I need your help," I said without preamble. "And before you ask, yes, it's risky. But if we play our cards right, we can expose some things that need to come to light." Rachel raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "Expose what exactly?" "The truth," I said simply. "About why I was pushed out. About the consolidation plans. About the board's agenda, and Marcus's role in all of it." She leaned back, processing my words. "Nadia, you're talking about taking on the entire executive team. Do you realize how dangerous that is?" "Dangerous?" I laughed bitterly. "They already think they've won. They think I'll slink off quietly and disappear. Let them keep thinking that while we gather evidence. Trust me, Rachel, if we do this right, they won't know what hit them." For a long moment, she studied me, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. What do you need me to do?" Over the next week, Rachel became my eyes and ears inside the company. She forwarded emails, copied documents, and eavesdropped on conversations whenever she could. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to former colleagues, people who had left the company under similar circumstances, disillusioned and defeated. At first, they were hesitant to talk, wary of stirring up old wounds. But once I explained what I was trying to accomplish, many opened up, sharing stories of unfair treatment, broken promises, and systemic manipulation. One name kept coming up, Daniel Hartwell, a senior analyst who had resigned abruptly 8 months earlier after clashing with Marcus over questionable financial practices. According to several sources, Daniel had uncovered discrepancies in the company's quarterly reports, discrepancies that suggested creative accounting designed to inflate profits and appease shareholders. When he'd raised his concerns, Marcus had allegedly threatened to ruin his career if he didn't drop it. Tracking Daniel down wasn't easy. He'd gone off the grid after leaving the company, severing ties with nearly everyone he'd worked with. But persistence paid off. After days of searching, I finally found him working as a freelance consultant for small businesses, living in a quiet suburb an hour outside the city. When I showed up unannounced at his modest home, he looked surprised, and more than a little suspicious. "Nadia Patel," he said slowly, recognition dawning. "I heard you got axed too." "Something like that," I admitted, sitting down across from him at his kitchen table. "I'm here because I think we can help each other." Daniel listened intently as I laid out my plan, occasionally nodding or asking pointed questions. By the time I finished, he was leaning forward, his skepticism replaced by cautious optimism. "You're serious about this," he said. "Taking them down." "I am," I confirmed. "But I can't do it alone. If what you uncovered is as bad as people say, it could be the key to blowing this whole thing wide open." He hesitated, clearly torn. "If I go public with that information, it won't just be Marcus and the board coming after me. It'll be lawyers, PR teams, the whole machine. Are you ready for that kind of fight?" I met his gaze steadily. Yes. With Daniel on board, the pieces began falling into place. We compiled everything we had, emails, documents, testimonies, into a dossier that painted a damning picture of corruption and misconduct at the highest levels of the company. It wasn't perfect, there were gaps in the timeline, unanswered questions that might weaken our case. But it was enough to start a conversation, and maybe spark a movement. The final step was deciding how to release the information. Going straight to the media carried risks, especially given the company's influence. Instead, I opted for something subtler, an anonymous tip to a whistleblower platform known for protecting sources. From there, it would be picked up by investigative journalists hungry for a story. As I hit send on the encrypted file transfer, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Whatever happened next, I had done everything I could. Whether it led to justice or chaos, I had taken back my power, and that was something no one could ever take away from me. But as the days passed and the silence grew heavier, doubt crept in. Had we done enough? Would anyone believe us? Or worse, had we underestimated the lengths the company would go to protect itself? Then one evening, as I scrolled through social media, a notification popped up on my screen. A major news outlet had published a bombshell report titled, "Allegations of Fraud Rock Tech Giant Caldwell Enterprises." My heart raced as I clicked the link, scanning the article. Every detail we had provided was there, laid bare for the world to see. The comments section was already exploding with outrage, calls for accountability, demands for answers. And at the center of it all was Marcus Caldwell, staring down the barrel of a scandal that threatened to destroy everything he had built. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a smile. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The fallout from the exposé was swift and merciless. Within hours of the story breaking, Caldwell Enterprises' stock plummeted as investors panicked and clients began pulling out of major deals. Reporters camped outside the corporate headquarters, hounding executives for statements while employees whispered in hushed tones about what came next. Marcus Caldwell called an emergency press conference, his usual charm replaced by a thin veneer of desperation as he tried to downplay the allegations as baseless accusations meant to undermine the company's success. But the evidence spoke louder than his denials. Journalists dissected every document we had leaked, connecting dots that painted an undeniable picture of corruption at the highest levels. Former employees came forward with their own stories, corroborating our claims and adding fuel to the fire. The boardroom, once a fortress of untouchable power, crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. One by one, board members resigned, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. Marcus himself stepped down less than a week later, issuing a vague apology that rang hollow against the backdrop of his ruined empire. For me, watching it all unfold felt surreal. Sitting in my tiny apartment, I scrolled through updates on my laptop, half expecting someone to burst through the door and tell me it was all a dream. But it wasn't. Every headline, every interview, every tweet confirmed that justice, real tangible justice, was finally being served. A few weeks after the scandal broke, I received a call from Rachel. Her voice was electric with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "They're restructuring the leadership team. And they want you back." I laughed, incredulous. What? Why would they think I'd ever go back there? "They're desperate," she explained. "The interim CEO is trying to clean house, rebuild trust." He reached out to several former employees who left under questionable circumstances. "You're at the top of the list." Part of me wanted to say no outright. After everything I'd been through, returning to that toxic environment felt like walking back into a burning building. But then again, maybe this was my chance to finish what I started, not just exposing the corruption but helping to rebuild something better. Something fair. "I'll think about it," I told her, though I already knew my answer. When I walked back into Caldwell Enterprises for the first time in months, it was different. The tension that used to hang heavy in the air was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. People greeted me warmly, many thanking me quietly for standing up when no one else would. It wasn't perfect, there were still challenges ahead, wounds that needed healing, but it was a start. The new CEO, a woman named Priya Mehta, welcomed me personally. She was sharp, compassionate, and unafraid to challenge the status quo, a stark contrast to Marcus. In our first meeting, she laid out her vision for the future: transparency, accountability, and a commitment to fostering a culture where everyone felt valued. "You've got big shoes to fill," she said with a smile. But I think you're exactly the person we need to lead marketing through this transition. It wasn't just lip service. Over the following months, Priya backed up her words with action. She implemented policies to protect whistleblowers, promoted diversity initiatives, and restructured compensation packages to ensure fairness across the board. Slowly but surely, the company began to transform, not overnight, but steadily, like a garden recovering from neglect. As for me, I found a renewed sense of purpose. Leading the marketing division wasn't just about hitting targets anymore, it was about creating meaningful work that reflected the values we were striving to embody. I surrounded myself with a team of talented, passionate individuals who shared my vision, including Rachel, who returned as my right hand. Together, we rebuilt the department from the ground up, earning accolades and awards along the way. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the office building, looking out over the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, casting a soft glow over the streets below. Behind me, the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air as my team celebrated another successful quarter. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Rachel joined me, handing me a glass of champagne. "To surviving the impossible," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers, smiling. "And to proving them wrong." We stood there in silence for a moment, savoring the victory, not just mine but ours. Because this wasn't just about me getting even or reclaiming my place. It was about showing that change was possible, that standing up for what's right could lead to something beautiful. In the distance, fireworks lit up the night sky, their bursts of color reflecting off the windows of the city below. It felt fitting somehow, a celebration of resilience, hope, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, light could find its way through. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it too.